Hey, I'm gonna do a quick review of Batman Ego, Darwyn Cook's first story in 2000. Uh, it's probably famous because it was his first pitch during the 90s when he wanted to break into comics, and eventually DC Comics turned him down, and he had later submitted this to Warner Brothers Animation, and he started working on Batman, Superman, Men in Black. Now, the main story is Batman is chasing after an informant and hunting him down, and eventually his informant kills himself. Then Batman spends the entire night brooding and saying, "Why do I continue doing this?" This is a very common theme in Batman. It's told in a very almost year one fashion. There's a lot of continuity in here that doesn't really make it that much, but still, it's told in that type of early Batman era, and it's interesting. It's a very difficult read for me to read. I don't claim myself to be a very big reader. I'm a very big comic book reader. I'm not a big reader, so things like this flew by me after I read it like 8 years ago. I mean, I liked it for its art. It's beautiful. It's ambitious. It's it's wonderful. Beautiful inspiration. It's not till recently I had to reread it like about 3 times to really sink into it. Now, Batman. The interesting thing about this is that Batman has a psychological dilemma with a manifestation of his persona of Batman, and it's a very large, cartoony take on Batman, which is both good and bad. It seems to be like a commentary on like Dark Knight and all the other artists who draw Batman as this kind of like giant leaping monster, and it's really good. It's really interesting. Sorry, it's very interesting. Because the best thing about this is that it's a moral fight between Bruce Wayne and the Batman, talking about what is all of this building up to, their responsibilities, their personas, where how does this expand out further, and that's where it's really an ambitious story. The problem is that when you compare this to like New Frontier or Catwoman or The Spirit, Darwyn Cook is, as like one of his first early stories, he tackles something with a little bit of problems. It's not as easy to read as The Spirit, or it's not as easy to read as New Frontier without knowing so much backstory. There's like a Hugo Strange reference in here that's kind of obscure, and I didn't get it the first time around. There's lots of references and backstory in here that isn't really explained very well. It's told in a very almost like the animated series style, which is where Darwyn Cook came from. Um, but it's interesting. I mean, like there's a scene in here where Bruce Wayne explains his last Christmas with his family, and it's told in a way that isn't like that's interesting. That helps him explain a lot about his innocence and explains a little bit about him without being like, let's say, abusive father or something traumatic like most poor writing does. You know, this is why a lot of people complain about like when characters suddenly become dramatically different from what they really were. This is an interesting way of going back on a character, exploring things, interesting things. I mean, like, to be honest, this backstory feels a lot more like Road to Perdition, the movie. Kind of innocent and not anything too difficult. The psychology is actually really good, and it's good for a fan who's been into Batman lore for such a long time. it's not an easy book for a newcomer. It's not an easy recommendation for a newcomer. This is for someone who's been a fan for such a long time and wants to be treated with respect and have something that's a little bit more, a little bit more that hits the right tones of being adult but not something exploitative. It's interesting. It tackles a lot of things head on, and it does it really really well. It's it's interesting because the Batman persona is it explains a lot. It does things that you know it does things that the movies can't do, but at the same time it's a little bit too much backstory for it to do. It's a definitely a worth get. Darwyn Cook's artwork is beautiful. Design is amazing. He's the master. It's really short. It's 60 pages. It's also in a hardcover along with his solo comic, and I believe a short story with Tim Sales. I've seen it. I don't have it. I have this one that I've had for 8 years. Like I said, it's difficult for me because I'm not that skilled of a reader. It's really good. Highly recommend it. Check it out. Batman Ego.